Alright, what's good everybody? My name is Sen, welcome back to the channel, and primarily, if you're not familiar, I talk about fighting games, I play fighting games on the channel. It's been a lot of what we've been doing. I do have a Let's Play of Horizon Zero Dawn going in the background, but most of the content on here is fighting games. Now, if you didn't know, I'm a fan of From Software titles. I've played through all of them. I recently beat Elden Ring over like a long duration of time of like picking up the game and putting it down, and eventually it got done. I didn't 100% the game, but I was just looking to beat the game. Now with that, any real discussion piece on a From Software title will be on my second channel. So if you guys want to check out my second channel, I am working on a retrospective. I'll just call it a discussion piece of the Joker. Link will be to that in the description. But regarding the game, I want to talk about an interaction I had very recently. Let's get things straight. I like this game. I'm a fan of this game. It's a fun, good, solid product, and if you were asking for a recommendation, I would tell you to pick up the game because I think it's good and I think it's worth playing. Especially, I think most, if not any, game is worth playing just so you can get some semblance how you feel. How a game makes you feel, whether it's like good or poor or whatever, like it's worth it for the experience. If you play a shitty game, you're like, wow, that game sucked. Knowing and understanding why it sucked is like a really cool experience. Just like picking a game apart and just like understanding it. But like, let me stop ranting. When the game was first announced, I was more than hyped. I've been looking forward to this game for so long. I literally got into like a 30-minute conversation with a GameStop employee about the game and like how like it got pushed back and everything. I was going to do a Let's Play of the game, but generally I was kind of falling out on the idea of Let's Plays. This was when I like first started to centralize most of my content around fighting games. I was just like too drained. I wasn't like enjoying the games I was playing, and I was kind of recording them for the sake of like needing something to record. And that's kind of like the point, like the turning stone of where I stopped Let's Playing games a lot, because I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. I was literally like, okay, like let me play this game for content, and even then the content wasn't that good, and I just wasn't doing what I wanted to do. Now, as I said, I beat the game. I did finish the game. I had about like 80 or so hours on my play clock, and a lot of that time was sunk into Millennia. Or I shouldn't say a lot of that time, but a portion of that time was sunk into her, because I was definitely hard stuck on that boss for a minute. It took a lot of time to beat, but eventually I did beat it. I did beat most, if not everything, by myself. I did beat Millennia by myself. The only thing I did not beat by myself was the final boss, and that's literally just because I wanted to try cooperative. Like, I wanted to like mess around. I was just kind of at the point where I wanted the game to be done, and I wanted to like experience it. The final boss really wasn't that hard. I definitely could have done it solo, but I was just like, meh, like I didn't really care anymore. Most of the time I will play a Souls or From Software game all the way through by myself before I do any cooperative, but I was just kind of at a point where I was just like, like who cares. Every time I talk to someone about this game, it always comes around to them saying that this is their favorite game, and I get it. There's a lot of game to love here, and for someone that wants to pick up the game or is curious, like if you don't mind a bit of a difficulty in your way, yeah, absolutely pick it up. Like game is a good package as far as the game is concerned. Regarding doing like a retrospective on Crouch Block, I wouldn't do it about this game because I don't really have any footage for it. What I'm gonna do as far as From Software titles is have like a bulk From Software video, and then but it's going to be primarily centralizing around the original Dark Souls, because that's my favorite game, and then every other game in the series is just kind of a comparison, like contrast to Dark Souls. So somewhat recently at work, a coworker of mine got a PS5. Now this guy is like late 30s, early 40s. He's a cool enough guy, and he's heard me talk about the game before, and I said like, oh yeah, like it's a bit on the difficult side, so if you don't mind that, by all means, absolutely pick it up. He gave me the old, I've played the DMC games on the hardest difficulty, I've played God of War on the hardest difficulty, I played The Last of Us on grounded. It's the optimal way to play the game. That's totally cool. I'm happy that you enjoy these games in that way. So out of what it sounds like, this guy's an absolute G. Fast forwarding a bit, he gets the game, and because my schedule's a little bit weird, I'm just going to say at the beginning of my week. So at the beginning of my work week, he would tell me all about his time with the game. I far from mind but it's always like first thing in the morning. Like I got my head down, like I'm half asleep. The Red Bull I just drank did nothing. I got an earbud in, like my head is down, and like I'm falling asleep pretty much. I'm tired as fuck, but I get it. He's excited. It's all good. It started out pretty good. He's like, yeah, I just got started. I beat a couple of bosses and other guys. I did a lot of exploring, found some caves. I killed the lake dragon, which is sick. I was like, hey, did you beat the tree sentinel yet? That guy was a little bit tough for me because he was like the first thing I ran into, and I just kept on going at him until I beat him. He told me no, which is perfectly cool. These games absolutely promote the path of least resistance. Like if you're running into something over and over again and you're struggling, like try a different place. That's probably the best way, like the most optimal way to play. The next Monday, he tells me all about his experience with the game, like that he's been having a great time, this, that, and the third. He's like, oh, I've beaten all these bosses. I beat Margit, or however you say it. I beat Godric. I'm doing some quest lines. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, man. I'm really stoked that you're enjoying the game. That's fucking sick. He's like, oh yeah, I'm beating all these hard bosses, but I keep getting killed by the bear. I get it. I ran into a bear, if not a couple bears. I'm pretty sure there's more than one. And he's like, oh yeah, I keep dying to this fucking bear. It's making me so mad. And I get it. Like I died to the bear like a couple times before I killed it. Now the next week, or the next time that he talks to me about the game, and it had been a little bit, but of course it's first thing in the morning. I'm on like 4 hours of sleep. Like I said, the energy drink I just had did nothing. I'm dead as fuck. Now, with this being said, if this guy somehow sees this video, bro, I really don't mind. Like, I really don't. I'm more than happy to talk to you about Elden Ring in the morning, but it's just tough for me to process something in the morning when I'm half dead, okay? But he tells me, like, yeah, I've been really playing a lot, beat some more stuff, and I asked him, because I couldn't remember, like, what he was rocking with. He just told me he was rocking sword and board, which is cool. Nothing wrong with that. And then he goes on to tell me that he uses spear on horseback. Like, cool. Whatever's working for you, that's fucking sick. He was telling me that he was running into some trouble with some enemies. They're like magic dudes, and they have like a bunch of spell bubbles, and they launch like a bunch of spells all at once in like a barrage. Personally, that could be a couple different areas as far as I'm concerned, so I wasn't too sure. He was like, oh yeah, those guys chew through my stamina. I just said to him, like, oh yeah, you either want to dodge through those, or like you want to run past them because they'll miss. You can dodge through most everything in this game. In most Souls games. He was hitting me with a yeah, but some interactions will give you like certain weird hitboxes, and I can believe that. Personally, I didn't run into anything too weird or too funky that I couldn't dodge through. The only things I would say in contradiction to that would be like spells that are like, oh hey, it's just better if you run in a straight line, they'll miss. As far as timing wise, there were a couple of cases where I had to sit down and feel like I had to actually learn a boss or like grind a boss out a little bit. Melania being one of those, because she sucked. As far as shielding though, I didn't really run into that because I was two-handing a gut sword. I didn't have a shield for most of my playthrough. I think at the beginning I did, but I was dodging so much of everything anyways that there wasn't really much of a point in me using the shield, so I committed to two-hand, a little bit more damage on the table. So the way I was managing my stamina was different from this guy. So I was like, oh yeah, that just didn't really come up for me because we were playing two different ways. But earlier in the conversation, he was telling me that he was getting pretty pissed during his play session, and at some point he had to turn off the game. I get that. Sometimes you just gotta put it down. After I told him though that dodging was good in most cases, but it's cool that you're approaching things differently with a shield, like that's awesome. He goes on to tell me, he's like, oh hey, I know you're a really big fan of the game, but you gotta admit, this game is tough. Like, this game is bullshit. And I forget the rest of what he said, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. He was telling me, he's like, oh, I don't need to defend the game and that it's like needlessly hard. I really don't know where he got that perspective from. Like, at no point would I white knight for this game. Like, I think it's a good game. I think most people should play it or give it a shot or whatever, just see how it makes them feel, and maybe they'll fall in love with what they perceive to be an amazing game. The weirdest thing in all of this is that it's not like I'm gonna white knight for the game. I have my own issues for the game, and some of my opinions are rather unpopular opinions, I'm sure. But the things that this guy was getting hung up on just didn't come up for me. So I'm not going to relate to your experience, because I just didn't run into those problems. I ran into other problems. I ran into a billion hours on Melania. Maybe certain areas where you struggled, I succeeded, and vice versa. Like, there could be something where I was like, yeah, man, like, fuck this thing in particular sucked. And it's just like, oh, yeah, I just shielded through it. Like, oh, I didn't even think of that. But for me, I was two-handing a big fucking sword. So you're gonna have a different approach. But I get it though. When someone's just like, oh yeah man, like I ran into this, it's fucking bullshit. It feels great when someone's like, oh yeah man, you know what, fuck that shit sucked. The thing is too, is that I've played all the other Souls games. This is like your first step into the pool. There's a lot of knowledge I know about how these games act and how they perform and how like you should go about certain fights that you just don't know because you're not experienced. But chances are you're gonna sink a shit ton of time into this game, and that's awesome, and then you're gonna come back and be like, oh, you're gonna tell me things about the game that I didn't know. With that being said, like, I get when you're in the moment, like you're stuck on a boss or an enemy or something, and someone's telling you like some advice or some criticism, or it's like, oh, you should approach it that way. Like, in the moment, you're just seeing red. You don't want to hear like the advice. But at minimum, this was like a day later, a day after the fact, so I don't think that would really apply. My main gripe with From Software titles is, yeah, like after 2, and yeah, I would say after 2 for sure, the games are difficult for the sake of it. I enjoy difficulty in my games. Like Dark Souls 3, I played the shit out of Dark Souls 3. I played it like multiple times through. Like, I love that game, and that's where I really start to feel that happen, and that kind of was reinforced more by going back and retroactively experiencing the other games. I got into Dark Souls at Dark Souls 2. I had played the first one, but Dark Souls 3 was the first game that I finished, the harder of the games. In Demon Souls and Dark Souls, like, you can run into things that are a little bit tough, but there's ways to like alleviate your problems. In Demon Souls case, a lot of the fights are puzzles, and in Dark Souls, there's a lot less of the puzzle aspect, but there's still ways to alleviate your troubles, like i.e. the golden pine resin, that shit's OP on some bosses. The Drake sword is great for early game, but can definitely be a little bit of a crutch. And then if you want like an amazing weapon, there's the Zweihander, which is literally right next to your starting area, and the list goes on. Spider Shield, yeah, great for Blighttown. But like, let me say, it's not as if the games can do no wrong. After and even during parts of Dark Souls 2, it felt like the main conversation as far as area design became, how many skulls and or skeletons can we fit into this corner? In Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and even in parts Dark Souls 2, the game was okay of having moments of beauty, like moments where like there were no enemies, like it was just a very serene area where it was just beautiful. Like Majula, perfect example for a lot of people in Dark Souls 2, like one of the main areas I think of. In Dark Souls 1, one of my favorite places is actually the forest areas. They're very like serene. I don't remember if there is music, but like just the background noise, and if there is music, like I remember just like sitting there and soaking that in. I didn't really have any moments like that in Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne. Maybe Sekiro, but I was probably so overwhelmed by enemies at the time that I didn't really think of soaking the area in. Now, I know that in Bloodborne, the game was supposed to be in that grayscale tone. It was supposed to be gothic, and the whole, like, that was the whole aesthetic of the game. But Dark Souls 3 adopted a bit of that, and they kind of incorporated that into, like, the plot a little bit, because the Age of Fire was coming to a close, or like at least a new cycle. Like, it felt like the Age of Dark was growing closer and closer, and you could see that once you link the first flame or the flame or whatever, that like before in the first game, like the whole room that you were in, the kiln of the first flame and yourself would just completely go into a blaze, like big fire. But by the time you get around to beating Dark Souls 3, and I forget the name of the boss, the spirit of the first flame, whatever. By the time you link the first fire, like, it's nothing more than like some cinders and like a very small fire that you can like cup in your hand. That means that like the Age of Dark is inevitable. I know that's like a plot thing, but in a way, this kind of translated to a lack of passion towards the development of the games. Maybe I'm like totally, it's very possible I'm in the wrong with this line of thinking, but that's just the way it came across to me. It felt as if the games were becoming what From Software would pump out to keep the fans happy, as opposed to being like someone's passion project, someone's like heart and soul. When I played Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, I felt that come across, and I would love to go back for the Kingsfield games because, like, obviously From Software was a smaller studio, but now that they become a bigger studio and they become more in the mainstream, I feel like that's a case where when they put out a game, it is marketed for sales. It is no longer like, man, I love this game. Like, I want people to feel my passion for this game that I made. And that could just be me, because I haven't heard that same opinion from anyone else that has played a Dark Souls game. Maybe I'm just stupid. I like all the games, but there's a reason I always go back to the first Dark Souls. If you want the TLDR, it's not that the games are perfect or can do no wrong. I just didn't run into the same struggles that this person did because we're playing two very different ways.